You know, you lived an entire, incredibly detailed life before you turned 3. You opened your eyes for the very first time, you heard your mother's voice, you took your first wobbly steps, and you remember absolutely none of it. It's just gone.
It's one of the weirdest, most universal things about being human, right? This giant black hole where the first couple years of our lives should be. So let's get into it. Why is your own beginning a story you can't actually tell yourself?
Now, the easy answer, the one most of us probably think of, is that a baby's brain just isn't developed enough to make memories. But, well, it turns out that's not really the whole story. And the real answer is so much stranger than you'd expect.
Get this, your baby brain wasn't failing to record your life. Oh no, it was recording everything. The memories were there, they were filed away. But then, something came along and basically wiped the hard drive. So the real question isn't why you couldn't remember, it's what made you forget.
This whole phenomenon actually has a name. Way back in 1905, it was Sigmund Freud who first put a label on it. He called it infantile amnesia, and for over a century, it's been a massive scientific mystery. To even start to solve it, we have to ask a really basic question.
I mean, can they actually learn something, store it, and then recall it later? Because if they can't, well, case closed. But if they can, that's when the mystery gets a whole lot deeper.
So, check out this brilliant experiment from the 80s. A psychologist named Carolyn Rovey Collier tied a ribbon from a baby's ankle to a mobile above their crib. The babies pretty quickly figured out, hey, when I kick, the fun, spinny thing moves, and they loved it. And here's the kicker. When she brought them back days later, they remembered, and they started kicking right away. Even 2-month-olds could hang on to that memory. So yeah, babies can totally learn and recall, but for some reason, those memories just don't stick around.
Okay, so if babies are making memories, where do they go? Well, the first big clue is a hardware problem. You got to think of an infant brain as this incredibly powerful computer that's still being assembled. The parts are all there, but they're not quite plugged in yet.
So you've got the hippocampus, that's kind of like the memory-making engine, it's still under construction. The prefrontal cortex, which is what helps you store and retrieve memories, isn't fully connected to everything else. And this key little part called the dentate gyrus, the main gateway for new memories, it's not fully wired up until you're like 2 to 4 years old. So your baby brain was great at making short-term memories, but it had no way to move them into long-term storage.
But honestly, that hardware issue, that's only half the story. And this is where things get really, really weird. In 2014, a couple of neuroscientists discovered something that just completely flipped our understanding of this whole thing on its head.
They came up with this idea that at first sounded completely backwards. They basically proposed that the very process that makes a baby's brain so incredible is also the thing that's sabotaging its memories.
These researchers, Sheena Jocelyn and Paul Franklin, they asked this wild question. What if the very, very busy process of building your brain from the ground up is the exact same process that's tearing down your earliest memories as they form? To get how that's even possible, you have to know about something called neurogenesis. So in the first few years of life, your hippocampus is just an absolute factory, churning out new brain cells, neurons, at an incredible speed. This is totally essential for building the brain you'll have for the rest of your life. But the researchers had a hunch there was a massive downside. Every time a new neuron gets shoved into an existing circuit, it messes up the connections that were already there, the very connections holding your memories. And they proved it with mice. When they artificially ramped up neurogenesis in adult mice, the mice started forgetting things they'd already learned. And then they did the opposite. They slowed down neurogenesis in baby mice. And guess what? Those little guys held onto their memories for way longer than normal. The conclusion was just stunning. Your baby brain wasn't too weak to remember. It was too busy growing.
But the biology isn't the only piece of the puzzle. There's this whole other layer, a more philosophical one, and it might just be the strangest part of all. See, to form a specific kind of memory, you need one absolutely essential ingredient.
And we're talking about autobiographical memory, the story of your life, where you are the main character. To make that kind of memory, you first need a concept of you. You have to know that you are a person, separate from everything else, and that stuff is happening to you.
The classic test for this is so simple. You put a little dot of lipstick on a baby's nose and put them in front of a mirror. Before about 18 months old, the baby looks at the reflection and thinks, hey, another baby. But after 18 months, something just clicks. They see the dot and they touch their own nose. That moment, that is the birth of self-recognition. And that's the moment you can finally start building a life story. Before that, there was no main character.
Okay, so we've got an unfinished brain, destructive growth, and no sense of self. But there's one final, critical piece to this mystery, and it's the very tool we use to tell stories in the first place: language.
A developmental psychologist named Catherine Nelson put it perfectly. She said that language doesn't just describe our memories, it gives them a skeleton. It gives them the structure they need to actually last.
And that makes so much sense, right? Before you had words, your experiences were just this flood of raw feelings and sensations, sights, sounds, emotions, textures, without words to bundle them up into a story with a beginning, middle, and end. They're like trying to hold water in your hands. They're there for a moment, and then they're just gone.
And this isn't just a theory, the proof is incredible. Research shows that the age of your earliest memory actually changes depending on how much your culture focuses on storytelling. In the Maori culture of New Zealand, which has this incredibly rich oral tradition, people's first memories go all the way back to 2.5. In a lot of Western cultures, it's more like 3.5. The culture you're raised in literally changes how far back your own memory goes.
So, let's put it all together. What really happened to those first few years of your life? Well, it wasn't one single thing. It was basically a conspiracy.
It was the perfect storm. You had a brain that was still under construction, unable to save anything long-term. The very process of that construction was actively overwriting your data. There was no you to be the star of the show, and you had no language to build a story. It wasn't just one thing. It was all of it, happening at the exact same time.
And that leaves us with this final, kind of mind-bending question about who we even are. If you had no continuous story of yourself, and the physical brain that held those early experiences completely rewired itself, cell by cell, is the baby in your old photos really you? Or is it a different person entirely whose mind was just the foundation for the person you are today?